David accomplished many projects in establishing the order and rule of the kingdom of Israel during his reign. This included setting up the administration of the government, ordering the division of priests and Levites, collecting the materials needed for building the temple, and setting up the hierarchy for a standing army. All these accomplishments are mentioned in the book of 1 Chronicles. However, none of them are mentioned in the book of 2 Samuel. The book of Samuel instead focuses on David's sin of taking Bathsheba and murdering Uriah, and its consequences, which extended throughout the rest of David's reign. Finally, there's an interesting correlation between the life of Jacob, the founder of Israel, and this portion of the life of David, the first king over Israel from the line of Judah. I'm Brenda Cathcart, and this is the Promise of Rest. God had stated that because David stole the wife of Uriah, one of his captains, David's family would bear the consequences. This included rebellion against his rule and the violation of his wives and concubines. 2 Samuel 12:11. Thus says the Lord, Behold, I will raise up adversity against you from your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this sun. Before David's death, his 3 oldest surviving sons would prove themselves as unqualified to succeed to the throne of David. This reminds us of the situation with Jacob when his 3 oldest sons disqualify themselves to inherit God's promise to Abraham. Instead, Abraham's promise went to Jacob's 4th son, Judah. In David's case, Solomon, David's 4th son from Bathsheba, will succeed David as king. The first hint of trouble within David's family came when Amnon, David's oldest son and heir apparent to the throne, lusts after his half-sister Tamar. Amnon's cousin and friend Jonadab, who is described as a crafty man, advised Amnon to take Tamar through deception. 2 Samuel 13:5. So Jonadab said to him, Lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, Please let my sister Tamar come and give me food, and prepare the food in my sight that I may see it and eat it from her hand. Amnon sought and received David's consent to have Tamar serve him in his supposed illness. Even when Tamar served him, Amnon refused to eat. He demanded that everyone except Tamar leave his presence, which set up his opportunity to rape her. 2 Samuel 13:10 and 11. Then Amnon said to Tamar, Bring the food into the bedroom that I may eat from your hand. And Tamar took the cakes which she had made and brought them to Amnon, her brother, in the bedroom. Now when she had brought them to him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, Come, lie with me, my sister. Despite Tamar's resistance and her attempts to reason with him, Amnon forced himself on Tamar. Predictably, after he raped Tamar, he blamed Tamar and evicted her from his presence. 2 Samuel 13:15. Then Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, Arise, be gone. The Jewish sage Abarbanel comments on Amnon's sudden hatred of Tamar. Abarbanel writes that it is human nature to feel regret and anguish after having committed a degenerate deed. As the saying goes, the wicked are always full of regrets. And Amnon channeled these feelings of self-revulsion into hatred of his victim. Now, as before, Amnon was guided by his own selfish interests rather than by the responsibility to do what is proper and decent. This incident parallels 2 incidents in Jacob's life. The first is the rape of Jacob's daughter Dinah. The second is that Jacob's oldest son Reuben slept with his father's wife. Amnon combined these 2 offenses when he raped his sister, a woman who was under the protection of his father. David got angry about the rape, but it doesn't appear that he took any action against Amnon. However, Absalom, Tamar's brother, took Tamar into his home since David had done nothing to protect her. Absalom then took his time to carefully plan and carry out vengeance against Amnon. 2 Samuel 13:23. And it came to pass, after 2 full years, that Absalom had sheep shearers in Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim. So Absalom invited all the king's sons. The NKJV Study Bible comments on Absalom's motive. Absalom delayed his revenge 2 full years, evidently to catch Amnon off guard. Absalom planned to murder his brother to avenge his sister's rape and perhaps to enhance his own chances of making a bid for the throne. Absalom was David's 3rd son. David's 2nd son is only mentioned in the lists of David's sons. Most commentaries agree that he must have died young. So if Amnon was also dead, Absalom would become heir apparent to David's throne. The length of time of 2 years that Absalom waited to carry out his vengeance has an interesting significance. 19th century theologian E.W. Bullinger states that the number 2 is the number of division or differentiation, whether for good or evil. A thing may differ from evil and be good, or it may differ from good and be evil. Hence, the number 2 takes a twofold coloring according to the context. In some instances, 2 represents the difference between imprisonment and deliverance, or metaphorically between death and life. For example, in Genesis 40:23-41:1, Joseph remained in Pharaoh's prison 2 full years after the cupbearer said he would remember Joseph. In Hosea 6:1-2, God said he had torn Israel, but after 2 years he would revive them. Paul tells us that the first man, Adam, brings death, but the second man, Yeshua, brings life. In these cases, the differentiation is from death to life. However, in the case of Absalom and Amnon, the difference is from life to death. So after 2 full years, Absalom invites all the king's sons to join him in his sheep-shearing festival, probably like the one in 1 Samuel 25, when David encountered Nabal. In that instance, Nabal refused hospitality to David's men, and consequently the Lord struck Nabal, and Nabal died. David's intent in that situation was to bless Nabal, but Nabal responded with evil. In Absalom's case, his intent was evil from the beginning. He intended to kill Amnon, and he carried out his intent. Absalom's invitation to the festival included David, but perhaps as Absalom expected, David refused the invitation. So Absalom strongly suggested that Amnon should be there in his place. 2 Samuel 13:25-27. But the king said to Absalom, "No, my son, let us not all go now, lest we be a burden to you." Then he urged him, but he would not go, and he blessed him. Then Absalom said, "If not, please let my brother Amnon go with us." And the king said to him, "Why should he go with you?" But Absalom urged him, so he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. Absalom had his servants kill Amnon when he was drunk and unsuspecting. In the chaos after Amnon's murder, David received word that Absalom had killed all his sons. However, the crafty Jonadab was at David's side, reassuring David that Absalom had only killed Amnon because of the rape of Tamar. You have to wonder if Jonadab had deliberately stirred up trouble and had advised Absalom about how to get vengeance on Amnon. 2 Samuel 13:32. Then Jonadab, the son of Shemiah, David's brother, answered and said, "Let not my lord suppose they have killed all the young men, the king's sons, for only Amnon is dead. For by the command of Absalom, this has been determined from the day that he forced his sister Tamar." After Absalom ordered the death of Amnon, he fled to his mother's father, Talmai, the king of Geshur, northeast of the Sea of Galilee. The scriptures state the fact that Absalom fled 3 times. Each repetition adds additional detail. He fled and went to Talmai. He fled and stayed there 3 years. During those 3 years, David was comforted for the death of Amnon. 2 Samuel 13:39. And the soul of King David determineth to go out unto Absalom, for he hath been comforted for Amnon, for he is dead. It seems that for some reason, David wanted to go out to Absalom. The question is, what was David's motive for wanting to go out? Did he want to see Absalom and be reconciled to him, or did he want to hunt him down? This literal translation merely states that David was determined to go out to Absalom without revealing his motive. The Hebrew word translated as determineth is kala, number 3615 in Strong's Concordance, meaning to cease. The Septuagint, Syriac, and Vulgate follow this definition, stating that David ceased to go out to Absalom. The pulpit commentary expands on the possible meaning of the literal translation. Literally, they are, as to King David, there was a ceasing to go forth after Absalom, for he was comforted, etc. At first he had demanded of Talmai the surrender of the offender, and when Talmai refused, David tried other means. But in time, when his grief for Amnon was assuaged, he desisted from his efforts. When there is ambiguity in the text, that usually means there is some element of truth in both interpretations. Most translations follow the idea that David longed for Absalom's presence, not that he ceased going after Absalom to hold him accountable for Amnon's death. It seems possible that David both longed for Absalom and wanted to bring Absalom to justice. Joab seemed to understand David's divided loyalties and enlisted the assistance of a wise woman to present herself as a widow seeking justice, and thus to reframe David's dilemma. 2 Samuel 14:5-7. Then the king said to her, "What troubles you?" And she answered, "Indeed, I am a widow, my husband is dead. Now your maidservant had 2 sons, and the 2 fought with each other in the field, and there was no one to part them, but the one struck the other and killed him. And now the whole family is risen up against your maidservant, and they said, 'Deliver him who struck his brother, that we may execute him for the life of his brother whom he killed, and we will destroy the heir also.' So they would extinguish my ember that is left, and leave to my husband neither name nor remnant on the earth." The woman's extraordinary circumstance was that her 2 sons had no one to mediate between them. One son then killed the other. Her relatives wanted to kill her remaining son. If he was executed, she would be left without anyone to care for her or continue her husband's name, and the inheritance would pass to scheming relatives. David ruled as Joab expected. The woman's son should be spared for the sake of the woman, the continuance of the man's name, and to preserve his inheritance. So, how did this apply to Absalom? The implication was that Absalom's grievance against Amnon was ignored. No one held Amnon accountable for the rape of Tamar. Therefore, the murder of Amnon was justified, or at least to be expected. Absalom should not be executed for killing Amnon. Israel, the mother, should not be left without a means of support and given to a scheming relative. Absalom should therefore be forgiven and restored to his place as the crown prince and heir apparent to David's throne. The woman responded to David's judgment of mercy by asking David why he didn't apply that reasoning to his own situation. 2 Samuel 14:13. So the woman said, "Why then have you schemed such a thing against the people of God? For the king speaks this thing as one who is guilty, in that the king does not bring his banished one home again." The implication is that if David had Absalom executed for killing Amnon, he would be guilty of violating his own judgment of the case. David found this argument somewhat convincing. He agreed to allow Absalom to return to Jerusalem, but refused to see him. This result was not exactly what Joab planned, nor what Absalom thought he deserved. However, in the eyes of the people, Absalom had been forgiven and restored to his position. The scriptures now interrupt the narrative with seemingly insignificant information about Absalom's physical attractiveness, especially his luxuriant hair. 2 Samuel 14:25 and 26. Now in all Israel there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his good looks. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head there was no blemish in him. And when he cut the hair of his head, at the end of every year he cut it because it was heavy on him. When he cut it, he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels according to the king's standard. Absalom's hair, his pride and glory, ultimately caused his death. The stalemate between David and Absalom continued for 2 full years, during which time Absalom plotted to steal David's throne. This is parallel to the 2 full years that Absalom plotted to kill Amnon. At the end of these 2 years, Absalom put his plan into action. He coerced Joab to intervene with David to convince David to publicly acknowledge him. This public acknowledgement is just what Absalom needed to begin his campaign to steal the kingdom from David. Absalom began by setting himself up with chariots, horses, and fighting men. 2 Samuel 15:1. After this it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. The NKJV Study Bible comments on Absalom's intended result. This royal treatment was intended to attract attention to Absalom and to remind the people of his relationship to David as heir to the throne. David's 4th son and the 3rd oldest surviving son, Adonijah, would later try the same technique but take it a step further. He had himself declared king by Joab and Abiathar, one of the high priests. 1 Kings 1:5 and 7. Then Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. Then he conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar, the priest, and they followed and helped Adonijah. Absalom used a slower, more invidious process. Once he established with the people that he was the heir, he undermined David's standing with the people. He diverted anyone who came to Jerusalem with the intention of seeking David to judge a dispute. 2 Samuel 15:3 and 4. Then Absalom would say to him, Look, your case is good and right, but there's no deputy of the king to hear you. Moreover, Absalom would say, Oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who has any suit or cause would come to me, then I would give him justice. When Absalom encountered other visitors, he flattered them and fawned over them. 2 Samuel 15:6. In this manner Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. This continues for a number of years. However, the scripture gives a number that almost equals the entire length of David's reign of 40 years and 6 months. 2 Samuel 15:7 and 8. Now it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said to the king, Please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I made to the Lord. For your servant took a vow while I dwelt at Geshur in Syria, saying, If the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. Josephus, the Septuagint, and the Syriac text all record that Absalom approached David after 4 years, not 40 years. Most of our modern translations stick with the 40 years. However, the English Standard Version and the New International Version choose to go with the translation of 4 years. Keel and Dalish argue that the word after in the verse refers to an event in Absalom's life. Thus, 4 is the only number that makes sense. 17th century theologian Matthew Poole offers an explanation that Absalom's rebellion happened at the beginning of the 40th year of David's reign, and thus is recorded in the scriptures out of order. Poole's interpretation implies that, since David is bedridden before his death, the physical trials of fighting Absalom's rebellion caused his final illness and ultimately led to his death. 40 is the number of testing and trial, and if this occurred in the 40th year of David's reign, he certainly faced a big trial. Absalom requested that he be allowed to live in Hebron, using the excuse that it was in fulfillment of a vow. It would have been hard for David to refuse the request, since paying a vow is a sacred duty. In his request, Absalom used all the right words. However, this was just one more way that Absalom asserted his authority to take the throne. By moving to Hebron, he returned to the place of his birth, and also the place where David began his reign. When David reigned in Hebron, Ishbosheth reigned from Mahanaim, until gradually David won the hearts of Israel from Ishbosheth. Absalom attempted to repeat David's success in achieving the throne of all Israel by winning the hearts of the people. In 2 Samuel 2:2 and 3, David had taken his supporters to Hebron, where the men of Judah came to him to make him king. Absalom took his supporters to Hebron, where he hoped that all Israel would come to him to make him king. 2 Samuel 15:11 and 12. And with Absalom went 200 men invited from Jerusalem, and they went along innocently and did not know anything. Then Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, from Gilo, where he offered sacrifices. And the conspiracy grew strong, for the people with Absalom continually increased in number. While David earned the hearts of the people by demonstrating that he was a strong warrior and leader of men, Absalom won the hearts of Israel by treachery and deceit. The consequences of David's sin are getting to the point where David is almost overwhelmed. His firstborn son Amnon raped David's daughter, Amnon's own sister. This led to hatred between two brothers, Amnon and Absalom. In his hatred, Absalom murdered Amnon and is, at this point in the account, on the brink of stealing the kingdom from David. David had lost the heart and the support of the people. What will David do to regain the kingdom and the heart of the people? I'm Brenda Cathcart for Moed Ministries International. Shalom and be blessed.